Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes in the New Testament. 30 Minutes in the New Testament is a 1517 Podcast Network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. While you're over there, of course, check out everything else that 1517 is doing, which is so many things. Articles, events, academies, videos, all that stuff. Go take advantage of all of it. And while you're over there, of course, support the work if you don't already, because it is all free. But it's not free to produce. And so you can help us out by becoming a contributor. So you can go and hit that donate link in the right-hand corner, become a reoccurring donor. That would help us very much. Thank you so much to those of you who already do that. Guys, we got a special episode today. We are gearing up to get into the book of Acts. And we've got a special guest host that's going to be in the book of Acts with us. But that's not the guest host we have today. Today we've got Old Testament scholar Chad Bird in the house to talk about what exactly. I thought Acts is not in the Old Testament. Acts that's firmly in the New Testament. I mean, you might be able to make some arguments that these gospel books, they're a little transitional, but I mean, come on, man. Acts, we're firmly in some New Covenant, New Testament territory. Well, we thought what might be interesting to do is talk about sort of the things that you can take from the Old Testament, and not so much we're not talking about theologies here or promises fulfilled necessarily and that kind of stuff, but to kind of ground you in what is the setting here, because a lot of the stuff you'll hear you'll hear things like Israel or the Jews or synagogue, things that are familiar to you if you've read the Old Testament, where you'd be like, I know about that. Well, do you know about it? How much of this can you just, copy and paste over? What is changed from the time of the Old Testament, from the ending of the Old Testament, to the setting that you have, in the first century as the apostles are going out, and what has stayed the same? And so Chad's gonna help us sort through some of this as the Old Testament guy, to say, hey, when you hear these things, don't think the same thing, and maybe when you hear these things, yeah, we're talking about something similar.
I mean, to be clear, Chad, you're able to read this book even though it's not in Hebrew?
I have a Hebrew translation that I read. Yeah.
Good. That's what I was hoping.
You've heard about these people that translated the Hebrew into Greek. Chad went the other direction, just reverse engineered it. And translated that Greek back into Hebrew is what he was looking to do.
That might actually be a good place to start, talking about something that is, probably most people know, but think about the implications of that. Acts was not written in Hebrew.
Yeah.
None of the New Testament was written in Hebrew. So, I think most people realize, okay, Old Testament, 99% is in Hebrew, a little bit's in Aramaic. New Testament completely in Greek, except for a few little Aramaic phrases that are thrown into the Gospels. Mm-hmm. But think about the implications of that. So the early church, Jesus himself, the disciples, most of the early Christians in that first generation were what? Well, they were Jewish. Mm-hmm. You had some God-fearers who were Gentiles, who attended synagogue, who certainly heard the gospel, believed. But the vast majority of the first generation of Christians were Jews. So what in the world is this book that's written by the apostles and the followers of the apostles? What's it doing written in Greek? That should lead to all kinds of questions. And so that kind of sets us on the trajectory of talking about all these changes. And so one of them is linguistic. So why is it in Greek? And what led to this? And well, the short answer, I guess, is a name, Alexander the Great. Right? You have, when Alexander the Great comes through in the 300s and earns the title the Great by conquering Persia and Egypt and extending his influence to all parts of that world. Well, with him also came the movement we usually refer to as Hellenism or Hellenization, which is basically the Greekification of the Mediterranean world. And part of that change, there were all kinds of changes, but part of that change was the impact of the Greek language, which became then the commonly spoken language, not just of the Greek world, but when the Romans became the top dog in that area. So at least in the eastern half probably you could say the whole Roman Empire, but certainly in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, even during the Roman era, you had Greek being the most commonly spoken language.
Yeah.
So what are these Jews doing having these Jewish Christians having Greek scriptures? Well, that's because that's what they spoke. That's what they, in fact, that's what they even read and studied the Bible in. So one of the impacts that we have of Hellenism and the ripple effect of Alexander the Great's conquest is that you have Jews spreading all over the Greco-Roman world. So this is called the diaspora, the spreading out of the Jews. And so they go in search of work or trade or whatever they're doing. And so they begin to settle all over the place. They're all over Egypt. They're in Rome. They're all over Asia Minor. And with them come synagogues, which we can talk about in a minute too. But while all this is happening, so you're not living in Judea anymore. You're living in the diaspora. You're living in the Greco-Roman world. So what are you speaking? Or you're speaking the language that's spoken all around you, which is Greek. And you also then need the Bible in Greek. And so you have the translation over time, started with the Torah, but then it spread from there to the rest of the Old Testament, the translation of the Hebrew Scriptures into Greek. So much so that by the time you get to the first century, even the New Testament authors themselves, most of the time when they're quoting from the Old Testament, if it diverges slightly from the Hebrew, they're following the Septuagint. That was basically I often compare it to the King James, the dominance of the King James Bible in the English-speaking world for so long. Well, that's what the Septuagint the Greek translation of the Old Testament was. So, in short, you have the spread of the Hellenistic culture, you have the spread of Greek, and you have also then the adoption of the Greek language, the translation of the scriptures into Greek. And then this, leads into the New Testament in Greek. Why? Because, well, those who are writing the New Testament wanted their audience to understand, to read it, and so they wrote it in the language that they were most familiar with.
Well, to that point, you just get a very clear understanding that there is something kind of it's not entirely different, because of course the Jews were called to share their faith and to spread the promises of God to the world, but it's not as explicit, whereas here in the New Testament it's just abundantly explicit that they mean for this message to get out to as many people as possible, and the Greek language is going to be the easiest way for that to happen in their world.
Well, isn't it true too that so by the time you get to Acts, we always think about like a completely literate world, where you're gonna everyone can read and write for the most part.
So.
And so by this time, so you might have some people that can speak some Aramaic, and maybe Jesus says some things in Aramaic and all that kind of stuff. But once you're spread out like that, you might know this with maybe immigrant families that or something, where maybe the parents can speak fluent whatever language they came from, but the kids, like, their first language is not that kind of thing. And so if you were out in the world for a little while and you say, hey, we're not all going to public school here, and we're not going to learn 3 languages, or maybe I can speak a little bit of it, but like, which one can I write in? Well, you're gonna choose Greek over even maybe your native, your people's language. So that even the Jews at that time, many of them would have been able to read Greek better than they could read something else.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. So when you go to synagogue, maybe you hear the scriptures read in Hebrew, but then a translation read in Greek. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you might even compare it to, like, there was a time in the Roman Catholic Church where you had the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
And maybe you'd been going enough to where, you didn't know Latin, but you understood enough to where you kind of, knew what was going on. But it really, of course, it wasn't your mother language. And that was really what happened with Hebrew. So I think most Jews in the first century world probably knew some Hebrew and probably a little bit of Aramaic, especially if they were in the eastern half, around Judea, Galilee, and whatnot. But for most of them, yeah, Greek was their language. In fact, I would be shocked if Jesus was not trilingual, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, because, well, look at his own followers. They wrote in Greek, right? So he knew Greek. His followers knew Greek well enough to where they were able to converse in this, and the apostles even to write in that. So yeah, there was an eclipse of Hebrew in Aramaic by Greek, and then at the same time it was as still happens today. You take English for instance. We're not just like importing English all over the world, but with English, with any language really, comes a culture too. So you have that same thing happening with Hellenism. It wasn't just like everybody learned Greek, but really the language didn't affect any other aspect of their life. They just were speaking a different language. No, with Greek also came Greek culture. And Greek culture was hugely influential on everybody that came into contact with, including the Jews. And you had, and this still happens today, of course, you have some innovation coming in. Well, you have some people who are like, yes, I'm all in. You have some people who are like, absolutely not, no to every single aspect of this innovation. And you have some people in the middle who are like, I don't know, I kind of like these things, I don't like these things. Well, that was a response of the Jewish world to Hellenism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see that tension pretty early on in the book of Acts.
Yes.
In the church. Even as God's gathering all these thousands and thousands of people, it doesn't mean that they're all getting along and singing Kumbaya immediately. They are struggling to figure out how to mix these cultural differences.
Yeah, and if you, for anyone who's familiar with the Maccabean revolt, which was predates the New Testament, predates, of course, the book of Acts. Mm-hmm. But this initially happened, not necessarily because of their Syrian overlords. It happened because there were disagreements among the Jews as to how much the Greek culture should be adopted and adapted to the Jewish way of life. And so you had the hardliners who ended up actually rising to the top. These were the Maccabean leaders and people who agreed with them. You had what you might call the left. And these are people who are, they're having these weird surgeries, trying to reverse their circumcision. They're participating in all sorts of Greek kind of events. They're giving their kids Greek names. Yeah. They're participating in the Greek gymnasium. All this kind of stuff's going on. You have them, and they're against the hard-wing, right-wing conservatives. And so you have this happening among the Jews, even predating the New Testament. And yeah, this continues into the New Testament as well.
So when you're talking about, because one of the things that comes up a lot is as you're reading like the book of Acts is you have like of course the spreading of the gospel and the establishing of the church and the growth of the church, and then you have like the opposition, and kind of your two major figures of opposition are when this is the way that they will say it is the Jews, right? So like this would be like the religious establishment Jews, the Jews in the power. And then the Romans. If you're just reading it, and I forget this sometimes because sometimes you just become familiar with something and you forget how weird it might sound, that in many cases it feels like they're working together, like this. They've got this common enemy, or that the religious establishment has convinced Rome that this is an enemy that they need to deal with. Which is the reason that is strange is because, well, who is it that is oppressing the Jews in the time of Jesus? Like this becomes very clear that it's the Romans, right? So how is it that you have united with your oppressor to try to stomp up this upstart religion?
Yeah, well, part of what's going on in the first century is again, it's a instance of what we were just talking about. So you have people among the Jews, Jewish groups and individuals reacting differently to the Romans. So you have some who are basically in bed with the Romans, and that would include the kind of the hierarchy, especially the Sadducees. The Romans basically controlled the high priesthood.
Were the Sadducees seen by the Pharisees, scribes, other people in the midst of the religious establishment as being kind of sellouts to Rome? Would they be seen as primarily that?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, you've got, I talked about the Maccabean revolt, which initiated disagreements between Jews. Well, the same thing is happening when you get past the book of Acts. Yeah. And you get into the Jewish war that led to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Yeah. Well, what's going on in Jerusalem while the Romans are marching toward the city? Jews are fighting Jews. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And the Jews that are fighting Jews are those who have disagreements as to how much we should be in bed with Rome and how much we should basically kill every Roman that we can. Yeah, so you got disagreements among the Jews as to how much we should tolerate.
Yeah, it's pretty
the
brutal
Romans.
too, the way that they are fighting with each other. I mean, it's not like just arguing. I mean, there is murder
This
and
is
death.
physical violence.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yes,
violence
physical
between
violence.
the various Jewish factions as Rome is occupying more and more and threatening to destroy the temple and the city and all that good stuff. And so you do see them, and I shouldn't say good stuff, but I'm saying it as a figure of speech, but you can see, and Josephus documents this pretty explicitly, and it is again, kumbaya is not what they are singing.
Yeah, well,
No.
and it's strange too, because even in the Gospels, so you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, so you have these two different groups, and the one thing that can unite them together is we got to get rid of this Jesus guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. For different reasons, but yeah, they both want to get rid of him. Yeah, the Pharisees, because they didn't see Jesus as upholding the oral law, they saw him as a threat, and some jealousy of envy going on there as well. The Pharisees were much more kind of the common people, but then you have the Sadducees. Well, they're against Jesus because he's a threat to the very comfortable life that they're living, because they were the rich people. They were the ones who were trying to do everything they could to make Rome happy. So they don't want Jesus around causing waves. They don't want him around threatening their nice, plush livelihood. And so they want to get rid of him. And they want to cooperate as much as they can with Rome to accomplish this. He's just basically a political, economic threat to them more than anything else. A theological threat, to be sure. But a lot of the motivations of the Sadducees were purely monetary. We love our life, and we have this life because we've tried to keep the Romans as happy as we can.
Yeah.
They're against him for differing reasons. And so when you hear, about the Jews being against persecuting the church, or the Jews being against Jesus, well, yeah, some were for sure. I mean, but you have others who are. They're converting by the thousands, as we hear in the book of Acts.
Yeah, that language in the New Testament of the Jews is you have to read that as the ones in power.
It's like the Sanhedrin. It's the establishment.
Yeah, this is chief priests, Pharisees, Sadducees, like this sort of thing. People that had the ear of people that could exercise any authority at all.
Yeah. And you also have we touched on this, that you've got synagogues all over the place. I mean, that's one of the things you hear about in the Gospels for sure, but you hear about it all over the book of Acts, and it's kind of funny when you go back to the Old Testament.
In weird places too, because you'll Paul will be preaching in some synagogue, and you're like, why is there a synagogue? Where is he again? Like, did I do the geography wrong? Like when I was reading this?
Yeah, they were. They're kind of a mystery as to when they began. So I read multiple books that kind of deal with like the Jewish world around the time of Jesus, and they all basically say the same thing. We don't really know. We don't know when they started. There's guesses. One guess is they began during the Babylonian exile, because the temple's destroyed. You're in a foreign country. You need to gather together. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to gather together. You're going to have a meeting place. So a lot of people say, well, they began then. Other people point to the time of Ezra, when you had the return from exile. The truth is, we really don't know. Probably the best guess most people have is that these started out, you don't have it not as a synagogue building, but as the name itself means it was just a gathering together. So people got together to pray, to study the Torah, whatever they did.
And there were certain rules that established whether you could call it a synagogue meeting as opposed to not, right? Is it 10 men that you needed at least in order for it to be considered an official synagogue meeting? Is that the right number?
Yeah, that's why you. Right. I think 10 is what you needed. And some places just didn't have that many people. Where is it that this is in the book of Acts? I just can't remember where it's at. Where is it that Paul goes down to the river outside the city, and he meets with a group that have met there to pray?
That's right. Yeah.
I can't remember the community where that happens, but that's probably a place where you don't have enough people for a synagogue. Right. And so what do? Well, they gather around the river. That's where they have their prayers and whatever else they did when they got together. But what began to happen, almost by, you might say, religious necessity, is when you have groups that are spread all over, Jews that are spread all over the Roman Empire, well, of course, they can't go back for the annual 3 festivals. They're too far away. In fact, many of them probably only made it to Jerusalem once or twice in their life. But you do want to get together to study the Torah. You want to get together to pray. And so you start getting together. And once you have enough, you're like, we should build a building. We should have a synagogue. And so you have, in any area where there are a sufficient number of Jews, you have these synagogue buildings, which I think was nothing more than God providentially preparing for the gospel, because he sets up places, he spreads the Jews, all right, all over the Roman Empire. God-fearing Gentiles are curious about these weird monotheists, very weird to be a monotheist in that world. And so sometimes they start attending synagogue. Jesus comes, fulfills all the promises of God, and then you have Paul traveling all over the Roman world. And where's he going to go? Oh, to these synagogues, right? It's a perfect setup. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to be welcome in. I'm going to preach. Some people will believe, some people won't. But these became the perfect places for the spreading of the gospel, these synagogues, which are not just all over the diaspora, but they were, there was one, at least one, probably more in Jerusalem itself. Archaeologists have found that synagogue.
And that kind of explains a lot, too, because if you think about, so what's the religious establishment's like real beef with this religion spreading, Well, think about if, you're part of a religion and you've got little churches, little synagogues. You got little churches all over the place or whatever. And here comes this guy who was, pretty learned, upstart, but had a lot of promise in this young theologian in Paul. Well, he decides to convert, and then his strategy is, I'm just going to go turn all those synagogues into churches. If you're wondering where the feathers get really ruffled, like this, they don't like this at all.
Yeah, it does, and Paul is not always all that well received when he does this. I think you can almost get this sense when you're reading the book of Acts that initially Paul is fairly naive about how he's going to convert these people. He's like, I'll just show them from the scriptures, and surely they'll submit to the scriptures. But anybody who's actually pastored a congregation knows that nothing is ever that simple.
I thought that when I got out of seminary too. I just go in and preach the word of God, and no problem.
Surely they will get in lockstep. Yes,
doesn't work that way. So just read through the 2 or 3 lists that Paul has of all the things that he suffered.
Yeah.
Well,
trying to convert these synagogues into churches that gets you stoned and flogged and
Paul got beat in synagogues. So this happened. So it was a starting point. And of course in some places he started synagogue and he's like, well, they're kicking me out, so I'm going to move next door. We'll have church next door. You can imagine how well that went over too.
Yeah.
A lot of opposition. And in the book of Acts, you've got people following him from town to town.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do everything that you talk about zeal. We're going to make sure that we stop this Paul. So, it's kind of crazy to read about him being welcome to some synagogues, being kicked out by the synagogues. But the synagogues were there for a very good purpose, so God's people could get together and could study the scriptures.
Well, you remind me, Chad, when you talk about the fact that, you can see the kind of the providential hand of God in all these synagogues being set up throughout the Roman Empire, etc. And, of course, you go back to a writing from the Apostle Paul, where in chapter 4 of Galatians, he says, when the fullness of time had come. And, of course, the word for that is this, exact pinpoint moment in the providence of God. God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. So there is that emphasis in the New Testament that none of this is accidental. Everything that had happened, from the language being universal to synagogues being spread out everywhere. We haven't even talked about sort of the Pax Romana, where that you have this elaborate road system that makes travel much easier than it had been. Everything's much more connected. You get this, you don't want to say globalization, but it's similar to the movement of globalization, where people are connected culturally in ways that they hadn't ever really been before. And it's all because of the context, the historical moment that's happening here.
Yeah, I can't think of any moment in ancient history that even came close to being such an ideal time for all of this to happen. Yeah, you've got the Pax Romana. relative peace around the world. You got the Roman interstate system. You got Jews spread out all over the place. You now have a lingua franca of Greek that almost everybody can read, Gentiles and Jews alike.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost like God knew what He was doing, and He set all this up right to happen when it did.
That's the powder keg. It's just like, hey, there's some dynamite next to in this old cabin with a bunch of kindling laying around, and like, you're just waiting for someone to strike the match at that point, right? And you're like, I think this whole thing's going to go up if somebody has a little flame somewhere. So maybe the last thing here. What would you say is the state of Judaism at this point? Judaism is weird because it's a religion, but it's also this sort of ethnicity, right? So you have Jews, and then you have sort of the ism of the thing. And what is the state of it at that point? Like, is it under threat of going away? Is it growing? Is it shrinking?
Yeah, I mean it's still very, very much alive, very well established. It's definitely not shrinking. In fact, you could argue that it's expanding in the sense you have, because of the diaspora, because of synagogues, you have much more Gentiles interested in Judaism than you would have ever had. I mean, we always had Gentiles who were coming into the life of Israel, but nowhere near the number that we have in the first century. So it's alive and well. It's still focused on the temple. Even though you have people spread everywhere, the temple is still the very heart of Judaism. And that's why losing the temple was such a blow to them in 70 AD. But you also have, I think broadly speaking, even though some of the Jews would have been fine with this, especially like the Sadducees, among the Jews you have this kind of long-held and growing desire to finally be free of Roman oppression. I mean, they've been through it. I mean, first the Babylonians, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks, and now the Romans. I mean, it's been, except for that about a century when they had some relative independence under the Maccabean rulers, they've been under the thumb of all of these foreign powers. And so they're itching for somebody to come along and to give them some kind of liberation. And that's why you also have a kind of a messianic fervor happening in the first century. We have all kind of false messiahs that show up, promising them to lead them into victory, all of which, of course, just fell flat on their face. But this also explains why in Judaism in the first century, in the New Testament, you have this really heightened anticipation for the Messiah. They're ready. Mm-hmm. And that's also why you have a lot of confusion about Jesus' ministry. Like, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing the messianic thing we've all been waiting for?
Yeah, David's stuff, please.
Yeah,
yes.
It does seem that the frustration is that, like, Jesus seems like he has the ability to assemble people to himself. It seems that he has the power. At least, I mean, the rumors are out. I saw him do this. I saw him do this other thing. Like, it seems, but lacks the agenda, and this is very frustrating, right? Where it's like, not only do you not seem like you're going to do this, you seem like kind of like that's the last thing in the world you would do. Like, you seem like opposed to it.
Yeah, you're going to let the Romans kill you instead of killing the Romans. This is not the way the Messiah is supposed to work. Yeah, so a lot of I think, just from a human standpoint, a lot of understandable frustration with Jesus because he's not living up to the commonly accepted standards of what the Messiah they think is going to do.
And so you don't want these guys going out there all over the world saying, hey, the Jewish Messiah did come, when you're very much ready for him to come in a way that you would like him to come, right? So the sort of the Jewish establishment is not ready to concede that this has happened.
Yes. Yeah. Very
because
very much
we're
so.
still being oppressed here. So what gives?
Yes. Yeah. They were wanting a very tangible kind of political liberation in the style of David, driving out the Philistines and whoever else, and that's not the Messiah that they got. So there was no great trumpeting of Jesus as the Messiah among the Jewish establishment.
And that's why I think in the Acts of the Apostles, as we go through the book, you're going to see what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, that the gospel is foolishness to the Greek, and it's a stumbling block to the Jews, but to those who are called, it is the power and wisdom of God for salvation.
Amen. Well, all right. Well, we're out of time. Chad, thanks for chatting it up, man. I think that'll be helpful for people as we dive into Acts and they hear some of this stuff come up. I think that'll give them a little bit of a roadmap. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, you bet. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Chad.
All right. We'll see you guys.
All right, see you.
See you.